So, today we're going to unpack a really powerful way of looking at a super complex issue, and it's all drawn from the work of Dr. Shungu Gadza. Let's just dive right in.
Right off the bat, here's the big question that frames everything. What if we thought about prejudice not just as some abstract belief, but as something contagious, something that could actually infect people and communities and maybe even whole societies?
So, there's actually a name for this idea, the racism attack virus, or RAV for short. The whole concept is pretty straightforward. Just like a real biological virus, it gets passed from person to person. And just like a real sickness, it can slip past our defenses without us even knowing it, often going completely undetected until the damage is already done.
Okay, so if we're going to run with this virus analogy, the next logical question you have to ask is, who's most likely to catch it, right? Who has the weakest immunity to this thing?
Well, the idea here is that our collective immune system isn't always at full strength. During big economic crises or just times of deep uncertainty, a whole society can become weaker, making everyone more vulnerable to these kinds of infectious ideas.
And it gets even more specific. Within that already vulnerable population, certain groups are seen as being at a higher risk. Young people and folks from deprived backgrounds are pointed out as being particularly susceptible, especially with channels like social media where misinformation can, spread like wildfire.
And for young people, a lot of this vulnerability is psychological. When you're in that phase of life where you're just trying to figure out who you are and where you fit in, you can be way more open to some pretty radical ideas. Ideas that promise you a sense of belonging, even if they're really harmful.
All right, now let's get to what might just be the most critical piece of this entire analogy. It's the idea of the asymptomatic carrier, because according to this theory, this is how the virus really truly spreads.
Just think about that for a second. The virus isn't just being spread by people who are openly and obviously racist. No, the real engine pushing this thing forward, according to this framework, comes from people who show no outward symptoms at all.
And to make this a little more concrete, the source actually draws a direct line to the COVID-19 pandemic. Remember how about 10 to 15% of people who had the virus were asymptomatic? They felt fine, but they were still spreading it? The argument is that this racism attack virus works in a very similar hidden way.
But it doesn't stop there. This whole idea of the asymptomatic carrier gets even more detailed. They aren't all lumped into one group. Instead, the theory breaks them down into two very different types.
And here they are, side by side. On one side, you have the unaware. These are people who hold racist beliefs but genuinely don't know they do. And on the other side, you've got the concealing. People who know exactly what they believe and actively hide it. Let's break each of these down.
Okay, first up, the unaware carrier. Picture this. This is someone whose worldview has been totally shaped by their family, their friends, the media they watch. They're looking at the world through what the source calls distorted lenses, but they have no clue their vision is warped. And if you ever call them out on something they say, they're likely to just laugh it off as just a bit of banter.
And this quote from Dr. Gadza just hits the nail on the head. The idea is that these people are so deep in their caves of privilege that this privilege acts like a bubble, an echo chamber, that literally isolates them from understanding what life is like for people who are different.
Now, let's switch gears to the second type, the concealing carrier. And this is a totally different profile. These are individuals who are fully aware that their beliefs are not okay in public, so they hide them. They only share them in private, with people they know feel the same way. And this is so important. Their silence when they see open racism is what allows the virus to keep spreading.
This quote just perfectly captures this group. They wear masks of tolerance in public, especially at work, but behind the scenes, they might be secretly working against diversity efforts. It's a very conscious choice.
So, if we have all these hidden carriers spreading this virus, how in the world do you even begin to diagnose it? How do you map out the symptoms when they're so often invisible?
Well, the source actually proposes a tool for this. It's called the 6 stages framework. Now, we're not going to go through every single stage, but the purpose of it is what's really key. It's a way to map out how human bias progresses, kind of like a medical chart. It helps track the illness all the way from minor symptoms, like, say, laughing at a racist joke, to much more severe ones. It allows for a more targeted diagnosis and maybe an intervention.
Okay, so let's pull all this together. Why does any of this matter? What does thinking about racism as a virus actually help us see any clearer? Let's quickly recap the main takeaways. Well, it shows us that prejudice can spread silently, often through people who have no idea they're even carriers.
It really highlights how our collective defenses can be worn down by stress and uncertainty. And maybe most importantly, it suggests that just being able to recognize these subtle symptoms is the absolute first step toward finding some kind of remedy.
And that brings us to our final thought for today. If we really take this analogy seriously, if bias can act like a virus, then the most important question we can possibly ask ourselves is this: how do we build immunity? What are the vaccines of education, or the booster shots of empathy, that could help us finally recognize this virus in ourselves and in our communities?